Guys, welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today, on a little bit of a micro pod again, we are going over Brian Hartline to USF. Absolutely love the hire for USF, and I do like it for Brian Hartline. Part of me thinks he deserved more. Now, when we talked about this coaching carousel in the beginning, when it was starting to unfold, when all these spots were opening up, we talked about how much we love some of these premier coordinators at these huge programs, like Brian Hartline and like Will Stein. We see Will Stein got an opportunity. He's a head coach at an SEC school in Kentucky, and now we see Brian Hartline gets hired. I want to talk about this Brian Hartline hire from all aspects for USF, for Brian Hartline, and for Ohio State, what it means for everybody involved. Let's get right into it. Now, I feel like Brian Hartline and these top premier coordinators have been a bit undervalued in the sport of college football. When we look at the last couple of years in the NFL, you see these premier coordinators, young coordinators turn into NFL head coaches. But it's not quite the same type of respect in college football. When you see these top coordinators like a Will Stein or a Brian Hartline, they aren't top candidates for these jobs. You see Will Stein, like I said, take the Kentucky job. Again, it wasn't the best job out there. And same thing here with Brian Hartline. But Brian Hartline is following this path to become a head coach at a top school because we've seen in this coaching carousel a lot of top programs rather go with the group of five head coach than the hot young coordinator. And I personally understand it because college football is way different than NFL. When you're a college football head coach, I feel like you have to wear a lot more hats than an NFL coach does. And you have a lot more responsibility because just of how everything works with the NIL, with the transfer portal. Now, like I said, I think college football is doing it wrong a little bit because I think you want these young coordinators in these head coaching spots because I think recruiting matters more than actual X's and O's on coaching. Like I think recruiting is the biggest thing in college football. And you're looking at Brian Hartline being the top recruiter and the top program in the country. I think that's a hell of a hire for a group of five program like USF. Now, obviously, like I said, Alex Golish, he goes to Auburn. This gets Brian Hartline this job as it does open up. Now, I think Brian Hartline is undervalued because of what he's able to do and his resume with the receivers that he had at Ohio State. Now, I think the common thought around this is, hey, Ohio State gets every receiver due to their name value, and he already had all these top receivers in the class, and all he did was make them pro, which I don't think this is easy at all. When you look at the Ohio State receivers, first of all, having them buy into Ohio State, I believe is very difficult because you're really thinking about a five-star receiver trying to come in, make its name to be an NFL first rounder, and join other five-star receivers. For them to believe in Brian Hartline and for Brian Hartline to guarantee enough production alongside these other receivers to get them to the first round, I think it's absolutely huge. And when we look at every receiver that they've had with expectations getting into the first round, when you look at Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Buka, all these receivers, Terry McLaurin. Like, the other thing I do have to say is not only do they overlap each other, and he got all these guys to the first round, which I think is very difficult, managing these egos, getting them enough production, like I said. He also got them in the middle or the top end of the first round when we've seen a lot of these guys haven't met expectations in the NFL, but he was able to deliver that hype to them to get them to NFL first round. Even when you look at last year with a guy like Emeka Buka, with all the talent they had on that offense, obviously he was at best the number two receiver alongside Jeremiah Smith. Cardinal Tate, again, a guy's going to be a first round this year, was also with him last year. Then you look at the two running backs that they had. Like, again, when you have all this talent in one offense, it's very difficult to get everybody that comes into you as a top-end receiver in the first round. But he was able to do that, and I think that, again, gets way overlooked. And like I said, he is the top recruiter at Ohio State. To get the top recruiter at Ohio State in a group of five as a hire, I think it's phenomenal. And for Brian Hartline now, in terms of USF, I personally do like the pick here for him. Again, I don't think he had, again, I think he was a candidate for almost every job in the country, but I don't think he was a top candidate for a lot of these top jobs. And I don't mind him going the group of five route. Like we said, in the coaching carousel, we see a lot of group of five hires become power four head coach hires. And that's what we're seeing as a common trend. So he's following that path. The reason why I like USF for Brian Hartline, not only do I believe the American Conference really comes down to three teams, USF, and then obviously the two teams in the college football playoffs, fighting for the college football playoffs in that conference championship game in North Texas and Tulane. I also really like USF for Brian Hartline because as being a top recruiter that Brian Hartline is, he doesn't really have to go out of state much now because he is in a top recruiting state in Florida, arguably the best recruiting state in Florida. And I feel like that opens up a ton of opportunity for him in state. Not only is Florida might be the best recruiting state in all of college football, but also the state of the other Florida football teams. Right now, we see Florida and Florida State is a mess. And again, if you're a kid in state, you may lean to those teams because of just the name that they've carried over the last 20, 30 years. Obviously, a lot higher than a USF. But again, it does open some opportunities for you to take a Florida kid away from those schools and to your program, not only because of the name and the resume that you have, but also the state of those programs. So I really like Florida being the opportunity for recruiting for arguably the best recruiter in the country. So I absolutely love this hire for both sides. Do I think it's a lot better than USF for Brian Hartline? Yes, but I think college football right now is not valuing these young coordinators as much as I do because I think NIL transfer portal recruiting is the biggest thing right now in college football over coaching in game. I think it's even more important than that. And I, again, think a lot of people want to see these guys as head coaches first before you make them the guy in a top power four program. So I like the route that Brian Hartline is taking. And again, my biggest thing is not only does the group of five have a lot of opportunity, like we said, that path, but I also love that he took the job in Florida because Florida is one of the hottest recruiting states. And again, that's Brian Hartline's biggest draw. Now we're going to get into how this affects Ohio State. Now, I think this affects Ohio State greatly. You guys are seeing it right now. Chris Henry Jr., a guy that was committed to Ohio State, is now thinking about where he wants to go coming to his senior year recruiting. He's basically just took a step back and said, I'm not sure on Ohio State. I'm going to look at everything now. Because again, this, in my opinion, comes down to Brian Hartline leaving. Like, if you're a wide receiver committed to Ohio State over the last couple of years, a lot of it is because it's linked to Brian Hartline and what he's able to do. Now, we've seen Ryan Day really do a great job in hiring his coordinators. Sorry, guys. I mean, we saw last year with Jim Knowles leaving, and we saw last year with Chip Kelly leaving. He did a phenomenal job. It was easy on the offensive side, him elevating Brian Hartline, because again, Brian Hartline is able to take control of that whole offense as the main offensive coordinator. But on the defensive side of the ball, he took a guy in Matt Patricia that nobody really wanted in the football world, and that defense has been historic under him. So now Ryan Day has a lot of pressure after this season to get the right guy as an offensive coordinator and to get the right guy as your main recruiter. Like, again, you could say Ohio State name value, they're going to be able to get all these top prospects, which again, you may be right. But I think, again, hiring the right people for these jobs, the right recruiter and the right guy to help run your offense, I think it's a big deal. And I think it's very important that, again, he's going to lose these coordinators because of how well Ohio State is doing and how dominant they have been. But again, just like he got the right defensive coordinator this year in Matt Patricia, I think it's going to be very vital that he really thinks about this hire and gets the right guy. Again, there's going to be a lot of demand for that job for sure. And now the last thing I wanted to cover with this Brian Hartline hire is Brian Hartline still being allowed by Ohio State to coach in the college football playoffs. Now, I told you guys with the Lane Kiffin thing, I think he should have 100% not coached in the college football playoffs. But for Brian Hartline, I think he 100% should be able to coach in the college football playoffs. And I think Ohio State is doing the right thing by him because when you look at it, you're a coordinator at a top school. That school knows you're going to take a head coaching job eventually if you do your job for them. And again, I don't think Brian Hartline in any way backstabbed Ohio State He's doing the best thing for him. He's taking a promotion job. It isn't like LSU Ole Miss where the pay was apples to apples and you decided to go in the SEC and again, basically backstab Ole Miss. I don't really look at it as that. Brian Hartline, we all knew he was going to be a head coach in college football one day, and I think it's respectable that Ohio State leaves him on the staff, and I think it's vital for them as well because he's a big part for Ohio State. So again, wrapping everything up, I think it's very important that Ryan Day at the end of this year gets the right hire on the offense side of the ball for a coordinator. I think for USF, they're the biggest winner in this party. It's an absolute home run for them. And for Brian Hartline, I do like the group of 5 to Power 4 head coach route. I do think this is a stepping stone form, but I think it's the right stepping stone as Florida, again, is one of the hottest recruiting states in the country, and he's the country's top recruiter. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Drop down below what you think of this Brian Hartline hire, and we are